Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to be diving deep into Being Genuine by Thomas Domsenberg,
Awesome.
which I am really looking forward to.
Me too.
I know a lot of you out there listening are really interested in learning how to better communicate,
For sure.
express yourself authentically,
Yeah.
and really, connect on a deeper level with the people in your life.
Absolutely.
So I think that this is going to be a really interesting one for everyone.
Yeah, I think this book is a really great resource for that. And Donsenberg, he's coming at it from this perspective of a psychotherapist.
Right.
And so he really have a lot of experience with kind of helping people to get to the root of their communication issues.
Okay, so I've heard of this concept of nonviolent communication, NVC,
Hmm.
and it can be a little bit intimidating when
Yeah.
you first hear it.
I agree with that.
Like, what is nonviolent communication?
Right.
So can we just break it down to like the basic
Yeah.
concept for the listeners?
Absolutely. So at its core, NVC is really about understanding that we all have needs, and these needs really drive our feelings and our behaviors. And so it's a way of communicating that helps us to express those needs
Okay.
in a way that is honest and respectful while also being receptive to the needs of others.
So is it like less about the specific words you use and more about really understanding what's behind the words?
You got
Like what's motivating?
Exactly. Yeah. It's about shifting from like a blame-centered approach to a need-centered approach.
Okay.
So instead of saying something like, you always interrupt me,
Right.
which, let's be honest, is going to probably put the other person on the defensive.
Yeah.
You could instead try saying something like, I'm feeling frustrated because I need to feel heard and respected in this conversation.
Okay.
Could we try to, listen to each other more fully?
Right. Right.
Something like that.
Yeah, that feels much more solution-oriented.
Exactly.
And it's not like pointing the finger.
Yeah, it's about collaboration.
Yeah, okay.
So Donsenberg kind of lays this out. This approach in 4 steps or principles: observation, feeling, needs, and request.
Okay, I like it, a 4-step process.
Yeah.
It's a better communication.
It's a framework.
Okay, so let's take those one by one.
Yeah.
What is observation?
So observation is essentially the first step, and it's all about separating facts from judgments.
Okay.
So, for example, instead of saying, you're always late,
Right.
which, let's be honest, that's a judgment. It's not
Yeah.
really a fact.
Yeah.
You can simply observe, the meeting was scheduled to start at 10 of 8 a.m., and you arrived at 10 of 5 a.m.
Right. You're just stating the facts.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so it's like taking a step back from the situation
Yeah.
and kind of looking at it with neutral eyes.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we stated the facts without judgment. What's next?
So the next step is feelings. And this is where we identify and we express our emotions
Okay.
in response to that observation that we just made.
Mm-hmm.
So this is about owning our feelings without blaming others for them. So for example, instead of saying, you make me so angry,
Yeah.
which again is blaming the other person for how you're feeling,
Right.
you could try saying something like, I feel frustrated when meetings start late because it makes me feel like my time isn't being respected.
Okay, so I'm hearing the shift from you make me feel to I feel
Precisely.
because of this.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
very subtle shift in language,
Yeah,
but it can really change the tone of a conversation.
make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've observed, we've expressed our feelings, now we're getting to the needs.
Yeah, so needs is the third step.
Okay.
And this is where we really uncover those deeper needs that are driving our feelings.
Okay.
So, in that example of being frustrated about the late meeting,
Mm-hmm.
the underlying need might be for respect or efficiency or fairness.
Okay.
It's really about understanding what's at the core of that emotional response.
Right, and I think that can be really hard sometimes
Yeah.
to kind of get down to that. Like, what is the need that's not being met?
It's a process for sure.
Yeah.
It takes practice.
But once we have figured that out, then what?
Well, then we move on to the 4th step,
Okay.
which is request. And this is where we make a clear
Okay.
and specific request to try to get that need met.
Okay, so not just complaining about it,
Right.
but actually saying what you would like to happen instead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, in that example of the late meeting,
Mm-hmm.
you could say something like, could we all agree to start meetings promptly at the scheduled time?
Okay.
Or would it be possible to send a reminder email 15 minutes before the meeting?
Right.
Just something that's actionable and respectful.
Okay, this all makes sense in theory,
Yeah.
But I think actually putting it into practice
Yeah.
is really hard,
It is. It's a practice.
especially when you're in the heat of the moment
Yeah, sure.
and you're feeling all those emotions. It's hard to like remember the 4 steps.
Yeah. And that's why Donsenberg really emphasizes that NVC is a practice.
Yeah.
It's not about perfection. It's about progress. So it's going to take time and it's going to take effort.
Yeah.
And we're going to mess up along the way, but that's okay.
So be kind to yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that's really interesting about NVC is how it helps us to become more genuine.
Okay, so how does it do that?
Well, one of the key things that Donsenberg talks about in this book, being genuine, is that our true selves are often masked by layers of, conditioning,
Yeah.
social expectations, and fears.
Right?
And so NVC, by encouraging us to connect with our feelings and needs,
Mm-hmm.
helps us to peel back those layers and really, be more authentic in our expression.
So it's almost like this process of self-discovery as well.
I love that. Yeah. It's about getting to know yourself better.
Okay.
And then through that self-knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
being able to communicate more authentically with others.
Right. And then like you were saying earlier, that helps you to build stronger connections.
Exactly.
Because I think when you're being genuine,
Yes.
the people around you feel like they can be genuine as well. Okay, but that first step of like expressing your true feelings and needs can be really scary for people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So what are some of the things that make it so hard?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is fear,
Yeah.
right? We worry about being judged. We worry about being rejected
Mm.
or even hurt if we reveal our true selves.
Like if we let people see who we really are?
Exactly. And, a lot of us have had past experiences where we have been vulnerable and it's led to pain.
Right.
And so we build up these walls to protect ourselves.
Right.
But those walls, even though they might offer some temporary safety, they also prevent us from really experiencing that deep connection.
Right. So how do you suggest people work through those fears?
Well, Donsenberg, he really emphasizes the importance of self-compassion
Okay.
and gradual exposure.
Okay.
So, starting small,
Yeah.
maybe sharing a vulnerable feeling with somebody that you trust deeply,
Right.
and then, kind of building from there.
Like dipping your toe in the water.
Exactly. And I think it's also about, challenging those limiting beliefs that tell us we're not worthy of love and acceptance as we are.
Wow. So there's a lot to unpack here.
There is a lot to unpack.
We've really just scratched the surface.
Yeah, this is just the beginning.
Of NVC and this idea of being genuine.
Absolutely.
So I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into how we can actually apply these principles in our daily lives.
Me too.
So stay tuned for part 2 of this deep dive.
Sounds great.
Okay, so before we went to the break, we were really kind of diving into this idea of how nonviolent communication can help us express ourselves more authentically.
Right.
And I think the big question that I have is how do we actually put this into practice
Yeah.
in our daily lives?
It's a great question.
It seems like a really big task to just kind of overhaul the way that you communicate
It can feel like a lot.
with everybody in your life.
For sure.
Yeah.
But Donsenberg, he actually offers a lot of really practical tips in this book
Okay.
for how to actually integrate NVC into your everyday life.
Mm-hmm. So like what kind of thing?
Well, one of the key suggestions he makes is to cultivate a practice of what he calls mindful observation.
Okay, we talked about that before.
We did, yeah.
The separating facts from judgments,
Exactly.
like that seems really hard to do.
It's
consistently.
especially
So-
when you're in the middle of something and your emotions are heightened.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're not always going to get it right.
Yeah.
But it's a skill that we can develop over time. So
But if-
for example, imagine you're in a situation where a colleague misses an important deadline
Okay.
and you're feeling, stressed and frustrated.
Uh,
Instead of jumping to the conclusion that they're lazy or
Mm.
incompetent,
Oh, in judgments?
totally judgments.
Yeah.
You could simply observe the deadline for the project was Friday and the project is not yet complete.
Right.
Just stating the facts.
Without adding your interpretation.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're taking a pause
Yeah.
before you react.
Take a breath. But then what happens next? Like, how do you deal with that feeling of frustration?
Well, that's where the feelings and needs steps come in.
Okay.
So once you've kind of observed the situation objectively,
Yeah.
you can tune into your own emotional response.
Okay.
So you might say to yourself, I'm feeling anxious because I need reliability in our team's work.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
you're kind of naming those feelings,
Yeah.
identifying the unmet need.
And not blaming the other person.
Right. It's not about blame.
Okay.
It's about taking responsibility for your own experience.
Right. And it seems like that shift in focus is so important
Yeah.
because it's really you're dealing with your own stuff
Yeah,
instead of like putting it on someone else.
exactly.
Yeah.
And, from that place of self-awareness, you can then make a clear and respectful request.
Okay.
So you might say something like, hey, I'm feeling anxious about the project deadline being missed. Could we discuss a plan to ensure that it gets completed as soon as possible?
Okay. So it's almost like this process of self-reflection before you even really communicate
Yeah, I love
with
that.
the other person.
It's so much about understanding yourself first,
Yeah.
because when you understand yourself,
Right.
then you can communicate more effectively with other people.
Bonsenberg talks about this idea of like regular self-connection.
He does, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so, he suggests taking a few minutes each day just to check in with yourself
Okay.
and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now?
Okay.
What's causing this feeling? What need of mine is being met or unmet in this moment?
It's like an emotional check-in.
It is, yeah, like taking your emotional temperature.
Yeah.
And I think what's so powerful about that is when we become more aware of our own feelings and needs, we're less likely to, react impulsively or project them onto others.
Yeah.
We can approach those interactions with more clarity and more intention.
But I think what's also hard about this is that sometimes even when you have the best intentions, you slip up.
That's going to happen.
Yeah. You say something you regret, you fall back into those old patterns of blaming or criticizing.
Of course.
So what do you do when that happens?
Well, Dunsenberg, he acknowledges that this is part of the process.
Okay, good. So we're not failures.
You're not a failure.
If we don't do it perfectly.
No, not at all. In fact, he actually encourages us to view those slip-ups as opportunities for learning and growth.
Well, that's a good way to look at it.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So, he suggests a practice of what he calls reflective practice,
Mm-hmm.
where we take time to kind of review those interactions,
Uh-huh.
identify areas where we could have communicated more effectively, and then make a plan for how we're going to do things differently next time.
So it's like instead of beating yourself up for messing up,
Right.
you're like, okay, how can I learn from this?
Exactly.
Right.
And I think that's a really important part of NVC is this idea of self-compassion.
Yeah.
We need to be kind to ourselves.
Especially when we're trying to learn new things.
For sure.
It can be discouraging when you set these really high expectations for yourself.
Absolutely. And Donsenberg, he really emphasizes that, personal growth is a journey. It's not a destination.
Mm-hmm.
So there are going to be bumps in the road, and that's okay.
So what if you feel like you're getting stuck?
Well, one thing he suggests is, seeking support from others who are also practicing NVC.
Oh, okay.
So this could be through like workshops or online communities.
Yeah.
Or even just, having conversations with friends who are interested in learning more about this approach to communication.
So like a support group.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
It's helpful to have people who understand what you're going through
Right.
and can offer encouragement and advice.
Yeah, I think having that community aspect of it is
Yeah.
really important.
I think so too.
Okay, you talked earlier about how NVC can help us navigate difficult conversations.
Yeah.
So like what kind of conversations does Donsenberg focus on in his book?
So he covers a really wide range of scenarios,
Mhm.
from conflicts at work to disagreements with family members
Mhm.
to, navigating difficult conversations about sensitive topics.
Okay.
But what's really interesting is how he emphasizes that, NVC can be applied in any situation where emotions are running high,
Even when it seems impossible.
even when it feels like the other person is being completely unreasonable.
Yeah, so how do you stay grounded
Yeah,
when you're dealing with someone who just seems intent on like creating conflict?
that's a tough one.
Yeah.
But one of the key things he suggests is to focus on listening empathically,
Okay.
even when it's really hard.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that, empathy doesn't mean agreeing with the other person's perspective.
Right.
It simply means trying to understand their feelings and needs.
Even if you don't agree with them.
Exactly.
Are you okay?
And often when people feel heard and understood, they're more likely to calm down and be more open to dialogue.
Okay, so even if someone is like yelling at you
Yeah.
or being accusatory. Yeah.
You can still try to see their side of things.
Exactly. It's about trying to understand what's going on for them emotionally.
Okay, but how do you actually do that?
Well, Donsenberg, he recommends a few specific techniques.
Okay.
One of them is what he calls reflective listening.
Okay.
And this involves, paraphrasing or summarizing what the other person has said to make sure that you understand them correctly.
Okay.
So instead of immediately jumping in with your own perspective,
Right.
you might say something like, it sounds like you're feeling really frustrated because you feel like your contributions aren't being valued. Is that right?
Okay, so you're kind of like reflecting back what they said to
Exactly.
make sure that you're on the same page.
Yeah, and it also shows them that you're really listening
Right.
and you're trying to understand their perspective.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then another thing you mentioned earlier was asking open-ended questions.
Yeah, so open-ended questions are questions that encourage the other person to elaborate
Okay.
and share more about their experience. So not yes or no questions.
Exactly.
Okay.
So instead of asking like, are you upset about this?
Yeah.
You might ask, tell me more about how you're feeling.
Oh, okay, so you're inviting them to share
Exactly.
more.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think sometimes what's really hard is that it can be tempting to jump in with advice
Yeah?
or try to fix the problem,
Yeah, we want to fix it.
but maybe what they really need is just to be heard.
Often that's exactly what people need.
Okay.
And sometimes, the most empathetic thing you can do is to just be silent.
Oh, really? Silence can be a tool.
It can be a very powerful tool.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
live in such a fast-paced culture.
Yeah.
We're always trying to fill the silence with words.
Right.
But sometimes the most compassionate response is just to be present and listen.
Without interrupting.
It's
Or
the-
offering unsolicited advice.
Right.
That's hard.
It is. It takes practice.
But it sounds like that could be really helpful, especially when it comes to resolving conflicts,
Yeah, absolutely.
which we were talking about earlier.
Allensenberg, he really emphasizes the idea that, conflict, while it's often painful and challenging,
Yeah.
it can actually be an opportunity for growth and deeper understanding.
Which is not how we usually think of it.
Yeah, most of us want to avoid conflict
Right.
at all costs.
But he's saying lean into it.
Yeah, he's saying embrace it.
Okay.
See it as a chance to learn more about yourself, your needs, and the needs of the person that you're in conflict with.
So how do you do that?
Well, one of the key principles he emphasizes is, shifting from that blame-centered approach
Yeah.
to a needs-centered approach.
Instead of being like, you did this, you're wrong.
Exactly. It's not about who's right or wrong.
Okay.
It's about trying to understand, those unmet needs that are driving the conflict.
Right. So you're going deeper than just the surface level.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point because, blame is really just a way of avoiding responsibility for our own feelings and needs.
Mm.
And so when we can, take ownership of our own experience and express it in a way that's clear and respectful, it creates a space for the other person to do the same.
Right. So this all connects back to this idea of genuine communication
It does.
that we were talking about.
It all ties together.
Yeah.
When we can be honest about our own feelings and needs, and when we can really listen to and understand the other person's perspective,
Right.
it creates a foundation for resolving those conflicts
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's constructive.
Okay. So what are some specific things that you can do in a conflict situation?
So Donsenberg, he actually offers some really practical tips
Okay. Good.
for navigating those challenging conversations.
Let's hear 'em.
One of the suggestions he makes is to start by expressing appreciation for the other person,
Even if you're mad at them.
even if you're feeling angry or frustrated with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Well, it's about you're creating a connection
Oh, okay.
and reminding yourself that you value the relationship even when you disagree. It can help to kind of de-escalate the tension and create a more collaborative atmosphere.
Okay.
So,
Mhm.
instead of launching into a litany of complaints,
Yep.
you might start by saying something like, hey, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this, even though I know it's a difficult conversation.
So you're setting the tone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then from that place of connection, you can start to express your own feelings and needs
Right.
in a way that's clear and respectful, and then listen to the other person's perspective.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense.
Good. I'm glad.
But I'm still wondering, how do you apply these principles
Yeah.
in, everyday life?
It's a great question.
Not just in these big blow-up conflicts. So,
Right.
how does this NVC show up in our
Yeah.
daily interactions with our friends and family and,
Well, that's a question that Dansenberg addresses in detail in the book.
Okay.
And he emphasizes that, NVC isn't just for resolving conflicts.
Right.
It's a way of being in the world. It's about approaching all of our interactions, big and small, with a spirit of compassion, understanding,
Okay.
and a desire to connect authentically
So with your partner,
Yeah.
with your kids,
with everyone.
with the barista at your coffee shop.
With everyone, yeah.
Okay.
It's about seeing every interaction as an opportunity to practice empathy,
Wow.
to express ourselves authentically,
Yeah,
and to connect with that shared humanity that binds us all.
I love that.
Yeah,
This has been so illuminating.
I'm glad to hear that.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface
We have.
of nonviolent communication
Yeah, there's so much more to explore.
and this idea of being genuine.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited to kind of dive deeper into how this can help us to build stronger,
Okay.
more fulfilling relationships.
Yes,
That's something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm looking forward to exploring that with you.
perfect. Let's do it. Okay, so before we took that break, we were talking about how, nonviolent communication can really help us to navigate difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned that NVC can be a really great tool for building stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely.
And I know that that's something you're really interested in, so I'd love to explore that a bit more.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating how Donsenberg really links NVC to this idea of, being genuine in our relationships.
Okay.
He argues that, when we communicate our feelings and our needs honestly and respectfully, and when we can really listen to and understand, the feelings and needs of others,
Right.
it creates this amazing foundation for deeper connection and intimacy.
Yeah, that makes sense because
Yeah.
if you feel safe with someone
Yeah,
to be vulnerable and authentic,
absolutely.
then you're naturally going to feel closer to them.
Yeah, it creates that trust.
Yeah. But as we talked about earlier, expressing our true selves
Mhm.
can be really scary.
Yeah.
So how does NVC help us to kind of get over those fears and build the courage to be more genuine?
Well, I think one of the key ways that NVC really supports us is by providing a framework for expressing vulnerability in a way that feels safe and manageable.
Okay.
Remember those 4 steps we discussed?
Yeah.
Observation, feeling, needs,
Super
request?
slow steps.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so when we use those steps, we're really taking responsibility for our own emotional experience. And we're expressing it in a way that is less likely to, trigger defensiveness in the other person.
Okay, so for example, instead of saying, you always make me feel ignored.
Right. Which is blame.
Yeah.
You could say something like, when I don't get a response to my texts, I feel hurt because I need to feel connected to you.
So you're owning your feelings.
Exactly.
You're stating your needs,
Yes.
but you're not attacking the other person.
Right. It's not about attack.
Okay.
It's about expressing yourself in a way that invites connection.
Okay, so that shift in language can really make a big difference
Absolutely.
in how the other person receives it. But I think even with those tools, it still takes a lot of courage
Oh, for sure.
to put yourself out there.
Especially if you've been hurt in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, Donsenberg, he acknowledges that there's always a risk involved in being vulnerable.
Right.
But he also argues that the rewards of genuine connection far outweigh the risks.
Okay.
He actually compares it to planting a seed.
Okay.
You have to trust that if you nurture it with care and attention, it will eventually grow into something beautiful.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what if you do put yourself out there
Yeah.
and you don't get the response that you're hoping for?
Right.
What if you try to be vulnerable and the other person
Mhm.
rejects you or criticizes you?
That's where self-compassion comes in.
Okay.
It's important to remember that we're all works in progress.
Right.
And not everyone is going to be receptive to our vulnerability,
Yeah.
even when we express it skillfully.
Right.
And so if our attempts at genuine communication are met with resistance, it doesn't necessarily mean that we've done something wrong.
Okay.
It might just mean that, the other person isn't ready
Right.
or able to meet us where we are at that moment.
So you can only control yourself.
You can only control yourself.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can always choose to respond to yourself with kindness and understanding.
Even when other people aren't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the foundation of true self-love
Okay.
and self-acceptance.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling so inspired
That love.
to really try to, incorporate these principles into my relationships.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff.
As we kind of wrap up our deep dive here,
Mm-hmm.
is there one key takeaway
Oh, that's a tough one.
that you would want to leave our listeners with?
I think for me, what really stood out was Donsenberg's emphasis on the transformative power of empathy.
Okay.
He argues that empathy is really the key to unlocking genuine connection in all of our relationships.
So powerful.
And so when we can truly see and understand the world from another person's perspective,
Yeah.
we create this bridge of compassion and understanding that can really heal old wounds and foster deeper intimacy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that makes me think that, NVC isn't just for our personal relationships. It's
Oh,
for
the-
everything.
It's for how we interact with the world.
Right.
Yeah.
We can bring that same spirit of compassion and understanding to our interactions with colleagues, with strangers,
With everyone, yeah,
even people we disagree with.
absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, NVC is more than just a set of communication techniques.
Okay.
It's a way of being in the world.
I love that.
And it's about choosing to see the humanity in everyone we encounter.
And approach all our interactions with kindness,
Yes.
respect,
Mm-hmm.
and a willingness to connect.
Exactly.
It's so important.
Especially, in these times of division and polarization that we're living in.
Absolutely.
It's more important than ever.
Imagine if everyone communicated that way.
What a world that would be.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that NVC gives us a roadmap
I think so too.
to get there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up.
Okay.
A huge thank you to you for sharing your expertise and your insights
Thank you for having me.
on this book and this topic.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into being genuine
Yeah, thanks everyone.
and the power of NVC.
We hope you enjoyed it.
We hope that you learned something and that you're feeling inspired to incorporate these principles into your own life.
Yeah, go out and be genuine.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.